Types of domestic violence. When the general public thinks about domestic violence, they usually think in terms of physical assault that results in visible injuries to the victim. This is only one type of abuse. There are several categories of abusive behavior, each of which has its own devastating consequences. Lethality involved with physical abuse may place the victim at higher risk, but the long-term destruction of personhood that accompanies the other forms of abuse is significant and cannot be minimized. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about different types of abuse. The first will be about control. The second, physical abuse. Third, sexual abuse. Fourth, emotional abuse. Fifth, isolation. Sixth, verbal abuse, which involves coercion, threats, and blame. 7, using male privilege. And 8, economic abuse. So let's first dive into control. Controlling behavior is a way for the abuser to maintain dominance over the victim. Controlling behavior, the belief that they are justified in the controlling behavior, and the resultant abuse is the core issue in domestic violence. It is often subtle, almost always insidious and pervasive. This may include, but is not limited to, checking the mileage on the odometer following their use of the car, monitoring phone calls, using caller ID or other number monitoring devices, not allowing the victim to make or receive phone calls, not allowing their freedom of choice in terms of clothing styles or hairstyle. This may include forcing the victim to dress in a specific way, such as more seductively or more conservatively than they are comfortable. Another example might be calling or coming home unexpectedly to check up on them. This may initially start as what appears to be a loving gesture, but becomes a sign of jealousy or possessiveness. Another example, invading their privacy by not allowing them time and space of their own. Or forcing or encouraging dependency by making the victim believe they are incapable of surviving or performing simple tasks without the abuser or on their own. Or using the children to control the victim parent by using the children as spies, threatening to kill, hurt, or kidnap the children, physical and or sexual abuse of the children, and threats to call CPS if the mother leaves the relationship. Okay, so that was control. Now let's talk about physical abuse. According to the Amend Workbook for Ending Violent Behavior, physical abuse is any physically aggressive behavior, withholding of physical needs, indirect physically harmful behavior, or threat of physical abuse. This may include, but is not limited to, hitting, kicking, biting, slapping, shaking, pushing, pulling, punching, choking, beating, scratching, pinching, pulling hair, stabbing, shooting, drowning, burning, hitting with an object, threatening with a weapon, or threatening to physically assault. Another one, withholding of physical needs, including interruption of sleep or meals, denying money, food, transportation, or help if sick or injured, locking victim into or out of the house, or refusing to give or rationing necessities, abusing, injuring, or threatening to injure others like children, pets, or special property. Another example, forcible physical restraint against their will, like being trapped in a room or having the exit blocked or being held down. Another example of these types of aggressive behaviors is the abuser hitting or kicking walls, doors, or other inanimate objects during an argument, throwing things in anger, destruction of property, or holding the victim hostage. Okay, so that was all types of physical abuse. Now let's go into sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is using sex in an exploitative fashion or forcing sex on another person. Having consented to sexual activity in the past does not indicate current consent. Sexual abuse may involve both verbal and physical behavior. This may include, but is not limited to, using force, coercion, guilt, or manipulation, or not considering the victim's desire to have sex. This may include making the victim have sex with others, have unwanted sexual experiences, or be involuntarily involved in prostitution. Another example, exploiting a victim who is unable to make an informed decision about involvement in sexual activity because of being asleep, intoxicated, drugged, disabled, too young, too old, or dependent upon or afraid of the perpetrator. Or another example, laughing or making fun of another's sexuality or body, making offensive statements, insulting or name-calling in relation to the victim's sexual preferences or behavior. Another example of sexual abuse is making contact with the victim in any non-consensual way, including unwanted penetration, whether oral, anal, or vaginal, or touching, like stroking, kissing, licking, sucking, or using objects, or any part of the victim's body. Exhibiting excessive jealousy resulting in false accusations of infidelity, and controlling behaviors to limit the victim's contact with the outside world. Another example of sexual abuse would be having affairs with other people and using that information to taunt the victim. A last example would be withholding sex from the victim as a control mechanism. Okay, so that's all sexual abuse, but let's now go into emotional abuse and intimidation. According to the Amend Workbook for Ending Violent Behavior, emotional abuse is any behavior that exploits another's vulnerability, insecurity, or character. Such behaviors include continuous degradation, intimidation, manipulation, brainwashing, or control of another to the detriment of the individual. This may include, but is not limited to, insulting or criticizing to undermine the victim's self-confidence. This includes public humiliation as well as actual or threatened rejection. Threatening or accusing, either directly or indirectly, with intention to cause emotional or physical harm or loss. For instance, threatening to kill the victim or themselves, or both. Using reality-distorting statements or behaviors that create confusion and insecurity in the victim, like saying one thing and doing another, stating untrue facts as truth, and neglecting to follow through on stated intentions. This can include denying the abuse occurred and or telling the victim they are making up the abuse. It might also include crazy-making behaviors like hiding the victim's keys and berating them for losing them. Consistently disregarding, ignoring, or neglecting the victim's requests and needs. Another example of emotional abuse and intimidation, using actions, statements, or gestures that attack the victim's self-esteem and self-worth with the intention to humiliate. Telling the victim they are mentally unstable or incompetent. Forcing the victim to take drugs or alcohol. Not allowing the victim to practice their religious beliefs, isolating them from the religious community, or using religion as an excuse for abuse. Last example of emotional abuse and intimidation is using any form of coercion or manipulation which is disempowering to the victim. Okay, so that was emotional abuse and intimidation. Now let's go into isolation. Isolation is a form of abuse often closely connected to controlling behaviors. It is not an isolated behavior, but the outcome of many kinds of abusive behaviors. By keeping the victim from seeing what they want to see, doing what they want to do, setting and meeting goals, and controlling how the victim thinks and feels, the perpetrator is isolating the victim from the resources, whether personal and public, which may help them leave the relationship. By keeping the victim socially isolated, the batterer is keeping the victim from contact with the world, which might not reinforce the perpetrator's perceptions and beliefs. Isolation often begins as an expression of their love for the victim with statements like, "If you really loved me, you would want to spend time with me, not your family." As it progresses, the isolation expands, limiting or excluding their contact with anyone but the batterer. Eventually, the victim is left totally alone and without the internal and external resources to change their life. Some victims isolate themselves from existing resources and support systems because of the shame of bruises or other injuries, or the perpetrator's behavior in public, or the perpetrator's treatment of friends or family. Self-isolation may also develop from fear of public humiliation or from fear of harm for themselves or others. The victim may also feel guilty for the abuser's behavior, the condition of the relationship, or a myriad of other reasons depending on the messages received from the abuser. Okay, so that was isolation. Now we're going to talk about verbal abuse. Coercion, threats, and blame. Verbal abuse is any abusive language used to denigrate, embarrass, or threaten the victim. This may include, but is not limited to, threatening to hurt or kill the victim or her children, family, pets, property, or reputation. Another type of example of verbal abuse would be name calling like ugly, bitch, whore, stupid, or telling the victim they are unattractive or undesirable. Another example of verbal abuse would be yelling, screaming, rampaging, terrorizing, or refusing to talk. Okay, so that's verbal abuse. Now let's go into using male privilege. As long as we as a culture accept the principle and privilege of male dominance, men will continue to be abusive. As long as we as a culture accept and tolerate violence against women, men will continue to be abusive. Okay, so that's using male privilege. Okay, now we are using male privilege, and according to Barbara Hart in Safety for Women, Monitoring Batterers Programs, she wrote, all men benefit from the violence of batterers. There is no man who has not enjoyed the male privilege resulting from male domination reinforced by the use of physical violence. All women suffer as a consequence of men's violence. Battering by individual men keeps all women in line. While not every woman has experienced violence, there is no woman in this society who has not feared it, restricting her activities and her freedom to avoid it. Women are always watchful, knowing that they may be the arbitrary victims of male violence. Only the elimination of sexism, the end of cultural supports for violence, the end of cultural supports for violence, and the adoption of a system of beliefs and values embracing equality and mutuality in intimate relationships will end men's violence against women. Okay. Domestic violence is about power and control. A feminist analysis of women battering rejects theories that attribute the causes of violence to family dysfunction, inadequate communication skills, women's provocation, stress, chemical dependency, lack of spiritual relationship to a deity, economic hardship, class practices, racial or ethnic tolerance, or other factors. These issues may be associated with battering of women, but they do not cause it. Removing these factors will not end men's violence against women. Batterers behave abusively to control their partner's behavior, thereby achieving and maintaining power over their partners and getting their own needs and desires met quickly and completely. There are also many secondary benefits of violence to the batterer. A batterer may choose to be violent because he finds it fun to terrorize his partner, because there is a release of tension in the act of assault, because it demonstrates manhood, or because violence is erotic for him. Violence is a learned behavior, and batterers choose to use violence. The victim is not part of the problem. The victim may accept responsibility for causing the batterer to lose their temper, but the truth is the abuser must be held accountable for his behavior. Okay? 4 widespread cultural conditions allow and encourage men to abuse women. These are objectification of women and the belief that women exist for the satisfaction of men's personal, sexual, emotional, and physical needs, an entitlement to male authority with a right and obligation to control, coerce, and or punish her independence, that the use of physical force is acceptable, appropriate, and effective. Societal support for his dominance, controlling and assaultive behavior. By failing to intervene aggressively against the abuse, the culture condones the violence. Okay, now let's go talk about economic abuse. Financial abuse is a way to control the victim through manipulation of economic resources. This may include, but is not limited to, controlling the family income and either not allowing the victim access to money or rigidly limiting their access to family funds. This may also include keeping financial secrets or hidden accounts, putting the victim on an allowance, or allowing the victim no say in how money is spent, or making them turn their paycheck over to the perpetrator, causing the victim to lose a job or preventing them from taking a job. The abuser can make the victim lose their job by making them late to work, refusing to provide transportation to work, or by calling, harassing them at work, or spending money for necessities like food, rent, and utilities on non-essential items like drugs, alcohol, and hobbies. Okay, finally, I'd like to talk about stalking, or more specifically, common stalking behaviors. Stalking during a relationship or after it has ended is high-risk behavior. It is typically defined as the willful, malicious, and repeated following or harassing of another person accompanied by a credible threat of violence. It has been increasingly recognized as a serious crime in the United States. Safety precautions must be taken if it is occurring to you or someone you love. And remember, in most states, these behaviors are also against the law. So, example of stalking behaviors would be maybe making mailing cards or other cryptic messages, breaking windows or breaking into or vandalizing the partner's home, taking the partner's mail, leaving things such as flowers on the doorstep or at work, watching the partner from a distance, hang up calls on the telephone, following the partner with a car or on foot, hiding in bushes or other surveillance of partner's home, surveillance of the partner at work, other trespassing, vandalizing the partner's property, destroying property to scare or intimidate the partner, stealing things from the partner, breaking into the partner's house or car, filing numerous pleadings in court cases, filing for custody of children regardless of their needs, or not respecting visitation limitations. Okay, so that's it for the common stalking behaviors, and that concludes this video, Types of Domestic Violence. Thank you.